I'm now speaking with Brother Sage here in South Bend. Brother Sage, I appreciate your taking some time out of your schedule here and meeting with me. One thing I wasn't clear on, what exactly is your capacity or your involvement with Notre Dame University?
Well, my involvement with Notre Dame is back in 1990. We started a program called the Black Man Think Tank, where I met my wife, incidentally. I'm still connected with him with Black Man Think Tanks. I've spoken a couple times. I do lectures out there. I've never taught at Notre Dame, but I have taught at Indiana University South Bend, Southwest Michigan College, and I've done a lot of work with St. Mary's. So I'm a retired person, formerly with the Department of Transportation. Prior to that, I was director of the Urban League. Prior to that, I worked with troubled youngsters in the juvenile justice system. So at 70 soon to be, I've been blessed with a lot of rich skill development, but I'm retired from 9 to 5. I just do things now based on my interests, my love, and telling the story of the proud African experience.
Now, I first became aware of you when I was headed down to Richmond a few days ago to speak with the mayor there. So I decided to stop by the Levi Coffin House and met the lady there, and she spoke very highly of you, and she was surprised that I didn't know who you were. And that's why I had to kind of investigate and eventually make it here. How did you become involved in the Underground Railroad here in Indiana?
In 1926, George Mendenhall, a slave owner in Virginia, wrote a letter to Levi Coffin and asked him to help his slave and their wife get away. And he wanted them to go to Cincinnati or Franklin, Indiana, where the Coffin House is located. And in 1929, they got 2 flatbeds with horses and some livestock and some food, and set out from that section of Virginia, came through what today is West Virginia, through Kentucky, into Ohio, into Indiana, where Levi Coffin's property is. And that happened in 1829. So we lived there. We lived there probably for about, Dicey was James and Dicey Ampey, which is my namesake. My mother's last name was Ampey. She's no longer with us. But she was the Ampeys in Iowa. I can tell you about Ampeys in Massachusetts, in South Carolina, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Utah, Nebraska, Minnesota. We're all over the place, because when we came up north, we decided to make north our home and branched all over the country. So that's how the Levi Coffins got to know me. As a matter of fact, I have ancestors buried in the cemetery in Franklin, Indiana, where Levi Coffin House is. So the persons you talk with, I call my white cousins. Okay? And they know me because of the work I do with the Underground Railroad. So that's a little bit of the story. It's really long and involved, and I'd take up your whole tape. It's just that the more I study about my ancestry and my past, as of you, okay, the more I find out that these stories weren't taught to me when I was a youngster. So I have to teach them to myself and to my young people, so my granddaughters, my grandbabies can carry on the tradition.
But what originally stimulated the interest?
When you start hearing about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, you ask yourselves, where and how do I fit? Okay? Nobody could ever explain that to me, so I decided to explain it to myself. The only way I could do that is to doing history and doing research and delving into my family past. My mother, my father, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I can take it all the way back to the mother continent. I am Ghanaian. I'm a cross between the Ashanti and the Akan. I speak the religion of the Twi. So you see how far back I go? And there's a passion there. That passion is important to me, and I want to continue telling that story as long as I possibly can, so my offspring can continue telling the story also.
But why is that important what does that do for your offspring, for them to know that? How does that perhaps psychologically enhance something about themselves?
Well, it's sort of like a tree. A tree can't grow without roots. That's our roots. And I want to make certain that my family tree continues to grow. And the only way that can happen is the younger roots continue telling the story. I think that's extremely important. So when my granddaughter last February for Black History Month at her school in Atlanta, Georgia, talked about the Civil War. Well, she was able to grab members from my family that fought in the Civil War to tell the color aspect of the Civil War. You don't find much about Civil War with African Americans, but had it not been for us, the North wouldn't have won that war. My granddaughter was able to not only talk about Harriet Tubman and her role in the Underground Railroad and her role in being a military officer for the North, but also about Thomas Ampey, who was killed at the Battle of Fort Wagner. So when you see the movie Glory, that's my family story.
When you hear today, young people talk about how they find history boring and they just can't really get into it. Why do they say that? I mean, what do they get lost at, and to say something like that?
Well, a lot of it stems from the fact that never do they ever study history about themselves, except for Martin Luther King, maybe Frederick Douglass, maybe a few people. But we've invented over 100,000 things in this country. There's science. We won the Revolutionary War. The first person killed in the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks. Okay? They don't know that Crispus Attucks was a 6'4", 235-pound, 28-inch waist black man. As a matter of fact, the first person killed, the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth were all black men who told the British redcoats, we ain't going for that. And they weren't even free. They were slaves. Okay? They have no knowledge of the role we have played in this country to be where we're at today. And when I share that with them, they're surprised because they'd never heard that before. And then we can't fault the teachers because their white teachers were never taught about the African American experience. So what you and I and others like us have to do is tell the African American experience, because when we do, our children will listen.